Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So last year, I made a video running through my thoughts on the likelihood of Xbox purchasing each and every one of the major publishers. And since then, a lot of things have changed, not just with Xbox, but with the games industry as a whole. And so I wanted to make a more up-to-date version of that video so that when, not if, but when one of these acquisitions inevitably happens, you can come back to this video and see exactly how wrong I was about it. Now, a lot of people have been asking me to do this, and I always try to deliver the kind of content that you all are looking for. But that being said, this is going to be one of my longer videos, I think. The one last year was about an hour, and I wouldn't be surprised looking at the notes I made about it if this one was even longer. So don't feel bad at all about using the timestamps to skip around to the sections that you personally care about, because probably there's going to be chunks of this that you just are not interested in whatsoever, and that's okay. But without wasting any more of your time or mine, let's get into it. Hello, I'm taller now, and I'd like to talk about my parameters for this video, because there are some publishers that I'm going to be intentionally leaving out, and those are primarily ones like Devolver, Focus Interactive, and 505 Games, who are strictly publishers. They don't make games of their own, and so it doesn't really make sense for Xbox, or really anybody who we've seen be a part of this acquisition era, to acquire, because the things that they're looking for are primarily content and IP, and if it's just a publisher, you wouldn't really get any of that. So we're leaving all of those out, and for very much the same reason I'm also leaving out Valve, because while they're a huge company, they don't really make games. It's a meme, but it's also true, so there's not really any point in buying them. And also, because they're such a huge company, they would be extremely expensive and probably trigger more FTC oversight than it's worth. For the same reason, I'm also leaving off Epic Games, because again, while Epic Games would be a huge get, I mean, just putting Fortnite on your system, although you would absolutely keep that cross-plat, and being able to have full control of the Unreal Engine would be literally game-changing. The fact that it would be that game-changing would probably also cause the FTC to look into it a little harder than we would like. Plus, I think that it's much more likely that Epic Games would buy somebody else on this list than it is for somebody to buy them, if that makes sense. Speaking of people buying things, last year I really only took into consideration Xbox and PlayStation as potential purchasers, and while I am still considering those two, I would like to also add Nintendo, who I won't be considering very heavily because they've said that they're not really looking to shop around, but I just want to include at least the whole big three. And I'm also going to be including Embracer Group, because as we've seen recently with them purchasing Crystal Dynamics and basically the entire western half of Square Enix, they are here to play, and they should be considered in these conversations. But to go on to what Xbox specifically is looking for in the acquisitions that they're going to make, the things that I'm going to hold against these publishers as sort of a rubric to see if Xbox would be looking to acquire them, is, does it apply to the Japanese market? You know, would them buying this publisher get them a better leg up in the Japanese or just Asian market in general? Does it have a good legacy? Is there a good backlog of IP there to make it especially worthwhile for them to have? Is it good for kids? I actually specifically reached out to Boom from Double Barrel Gaming to sort of go over the parameters that I'm using here, and he was saying how much he would very much like to see Banjo-Kazooie get a remake, and how much he wants them to do like a kart racer or like a Super Smash Brothers type game for Xbox characters. Regardless, Phil Spencer has also specifically said that he's looking to buy more Xbox or more kids IP and to create more kids IP, so that's something that they want to be looking for. And unlike last year, another thing that I feel like I need to take into consideration is FTC regulation, which is basically just me saying, is this company worth the amount of oversight that buying them is going to cause, right? So that's everything. Let's finally get into talking about the actual publishers. Alright, so first up, in no particular order, is Bandai Namco. And I do think that this would be a really good get for Xbox, but there's a lot of ifs that have to come with that conversation, right? It's if Bandai Namco wants to sell, which of course we haven't seen any indication of that as of yet. It's if they would sell just Bandai Namco Entertainment, the video game company, and not also require you to buy the toy manufacturer or the amusement park company that I didn't know that they owned, but it turns out they do. So if you could get just Bandai Namco Entertainment, that would be really good. And also, frankly, if Xbox couldn't get something better, because while I do think that Bandai Namco would be a very good get for them, I do think that there's better ones on this list for them. But let's get into it, right? Okay, so with an acquisition of Bandai Namco, you would get a ton of IP, right? You're getting Ace Combat, Dig Dug, God Eater, Dot Hack, Katamari, Klonoa, Pac-Man, Ridge Racer, Tails, Soul Calibur, Tekken, Time Crisis, Xenosaga, a bunch of others, including probably the biggest one, Dark Souls. Now, of course, you're not getting From Software, who actually makes the game, but just being able to own the Dark Souls IP and potentially license it to From Software to make Dark Souls 4 exclusive to the Xbox would be really big. And it meets a lot of my requirements, right? You obviously are going to be affecting the Japanese market because it's a Japanese publisher, so they, they're bigger over there than they are here. You get a good amount of kids stuff, right? Katamari would be good with kids. Klonoa is a cute platformer. Pac-Man could be rebooted in some way. Legacy, you've got pretty well locked down with Pac-Man and things like Soul Calibur and Tekken, which also Soul Calibur and Tekken would be really good for Xbox to have because they don't have a fighting game right now, and it's one of their sort of bigger holes in their genre output, right? I mean, they do obviously own Killer Instinct, but they don't really have a team that can make Killer Instinct. So having Soul Calibur and Tekken might be a really good thing for them. On top of that, Bandai Namco is also probably best known for licensing a bunch of anime IP, right? If you've played a Naruto game, a One Piece game, a Dragon Ball game, it probably came from Bandai Namco, right? They have relationship with anime companies and they make those games. And I really do genuinely think that that might be sort of the biggest thing that you would get out of this, because if you took those games and you gave them a bigger budget and you really back them with like the weight of a Microsoft or even a Sony, anything like that, those could be huge. Anime is a huge deal, right? Not just in Japan, but also in America, really worldwide. Everyone knows what Naruto is. Everyone knows what One Piece is, what Dragon Ball is. If you could take those IP and have big, high-quality versions of those games be exclusive to your platform, it would be absolutely massive. It's basically an untapped market because, let's be honest, most anime games are kind of bad, right? Like, just not even particularly worth playing, which is a shame because there are so many great anime that would make fantastic games. But regardless, another thing that I want to talk about specifically with Bandai Namco before I go on a whole hour-long tangent about how big anime could be in video games, Bandai Namco has a really good output of games. They put out 4 games by themselves last year, and they're not that big of a company, right? They put out Scarlet Nexus, Tales of Arise, the Idolmaster Starlit Season, which I'll admit I had not heard of that one, and new Pokemon Snap, which I also did not know they made. I obviously had played that game, but I didn't know it was Bandai Namco, and it turns out that Bandai Namco actually has a very strong relationship with Nintendo, being as how Bandai Namco is actually also the company that makes Super Smash Brothers, just a little game called Super Smash Brothers, right? Yes, while it is Sora, the company that is sort of known for making the Smash Brothers games, it is actually made by a team at Bandai Namco, and so, Xbox getting that team would be huge for them. There's a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier with Boom, who very much want Xbox to have their own sort of Smash Brothers clone. I don't personally, but there's no denying that it would be massive for them. That being said, of course, we're talking about a company that has a very tight connection with Nintendo. They make Pokemon Snap, they make Smash Brothers, which is like one of their bigger franchises, right? And so if Bandai Namco were to be acquired, I think that it would almost certainly be Nintendo who did so, unless they were just completely not in the market to make a purchase, in which case maybe Xbox could swoop in. But I just don't necessarily see this one happening. While I think it would be a huge deal, and I would love to see those anime titles get the respect and the funding that they deserve, it just doesn't feel likely. So next up on the list is Koei Tecmo, and it's the one that I have the least to say about because I think it's the one on the list that Xbox is probably the least interested in buying, which is not, again, to say, like I said with Bandai Namco, is not to say that I necessarily think this would be a terrible pickup for them, right? There's definitely some positives to it. It's just that if I'm Phil Spencer and I'm looking at this list and I have my choice of any two of them, Koei is a very easy one to rule out, right? Let's go over what you would get if you were to purchase them, though. So, first of all, the thing that they're probably best known for is the Warriors series of games, right? Be that Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, or Persona 5 Strikers, which doesn't really fit into the naming convention, but it is a Warriors game. And they also own some probably more popular IP like Neo, Ninja Gaiden, the Atelier series, and Dead or Alive. So definitely some quality IP to be gotten out of this deal. And it meets a lot of my requirements, right? It's obviously a Japanese company, so that is a step in the right direction for Xbox. It may not be necessarily the biggest step they could take, but it is a good step in the right direction. As for kids, Warriors, maybe, like depending on what franchise you plugged into that formula, you could make a kids game. I mean, I played Dynasty Warriors when I was a kid. I wouldn't necessarily qualify it as a kids game though. And then as for legacy, you get things like Ninja Gaiden, you get things like Dead or Alive. So there is definitely legacy to be gotten out of it. It's just that, like I said last year, while this hits all of my requirements, it just doesn't do it as well as basically anything else on this list. And so it's just an easy one to rule out. And while I'm sure that Xbox would love to get Ninja Gaiden back exclusive on their platform, and I would love to see another Ninja Gaiden game, this is just not the purchase I would make. So third up is Square Enix, and this would have been a very different conversation a couple weeks ago, and I would have been very wrong. I started making the outlines for this video, full disclosure, before Embracer Group purchased the Western division of Square. And while I was writing that outline, I definitely said that I thought that Xbox would be buying the Western division of Square. Because just a peek behind the curtains, my reasoning was going to be that whenever Game Pass was originally announced, I remember there was this key art that they put out that had, I think it was Kate and Master Chief, and then it was also Lara Croft and Batman, right? And ever since then, I've always thought like those were IPs that they really wanted to get on their side. And so with all the rumors that Square was looking to sell off the western part of their company, I was like, okay, well, Xbox is for sure going to get on that, right? And obviously they didn't. And, maybe if they weren't busy with the Activision Blizzard thing, that would have played out differently, but it didn't. And now that it's just the Japanese sector of Square Enix that we're talking about in this conversation, I just don't think there's any chance of Xbox buying them, even though it would be a really big get for them. So you, on top of all the IP, right, you would get two very good engines. You would get Crystal Tools and the Luminous engine, which was used for the newer Final Fantasy games and looks really nice. You would get one of the most popular MMOs in the world with Final Fantasy XIV. I personally really don't like Final Fantasy XIV, but a ton of people do, and that's really all that matters. And then, of course, you get all of that IP that they didn't just sell off to Embracer. You get the Bravely series, Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, Drakengard, Nier, which those two are kind of the same thing, but whatever. Just Cause, Kingdom Heart, Legend of Mana, Parasite Eve, Star Ocean, and of course, the big one, Final Fantasy. Now, as far as meeting my requirements goes, of course, they hit all of them very well, right? I'm not saying that they don't do that. Obviously, they're huge in Japan. It's Dragon Quest, it's Final Fantasy. Those are some of the biggest franchises that exist in Japan. It's massive over there, and it's big here, but we can't even comprehend how large it is in Japan, right? Now, kids are again obviously covered with things like Kingdom Hearts and Dragon Quest. Legacy is completely covered, of course, again by Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Kingdom Hearts. Like these are all household names. People who play games know what Final Fantasy is, right? And if Xbox could pull off buying them, they absolutely should. It would be huge. It'd be a massive get. My reasoning for saying that I don't think it's going to happen is because in my head, I just can't get over the thought process that I think Square Enix is basically already sold to PlayStation. I think that they sold off that Western division in order to make themselves look more attractive to PlayStation, maybe to lower the price because we know PlayStation doesn't have a ton of money. And that deal's not going to go through for a while because, of course, PlayStation is busy with the legalities of finishing out the Bungie acquisition, much like how Xbox is busy with the Activision Blizzard acquisition. You know, these things take time, and they're not going to jeopardize one deal to make another one, even though Square Enix would, of course, be a much bigger deal than Bungie, in my opinion. But it's just... all the signs are pointing towards Square Enix going to PlayStation, to the point where, honestly, if Xbox bought them, it would be massive. I would love it. It'd be crazy. I just can't imagine it happening. And so I think this one is pretty safe to rule out. Here's one that's been on a lot of people's minds. Konami. Please, God, let somebody buy the IP away from Konami. They can keep the pachinko machines and they can watch the balls drop until the world ends. I don't care, but please give those IP to somebody who will actually use them and maybe even revive some of the old ones that people don't really think about, right? Because let's go over this, right? Here are the biggest IP that Konami owns. DDR. Castlevania, which has not had a new game since 2014. Silent Hill, which hasn't had a new game since 2012, unless you count PT, which was a demo, so I don't. Contra had one in 2019, but I don't think it was what anybody wanted. Metal Gear hasn't had one since 2015, if you don't count Survive, which people don't. And there's, of course, Suikoden. Remember Suikoden? It was a really great JRPG series that hasn't existed since 2006. If you don't remember it, I can't say I blame you, but I miss it. Does Konami meet the requirements? Yes, of course. They are huge in Japan. Put out a Castlevania, put out a Silent Hill game, put out a Metal Gear game. It will sell in Japan, I guarantee it, right? Kids, not really. I mean, there's DDR, but no, not really. Like, no. Legacy, yes, absolutely. Out the ass Legacy, right? You could announce. You don't even have to show a trailer. You just show a logo for a new Metal Gear game, a new Silent Hill game, a new Castlevania game, and it's going to be one of the biggest news items of the year, guaranteed. Guaranteed. It's like no doubt at all, right? Okay. I want this to happen so bad, but there's a lot of roadblocks that get in the way, right? Number one. Will they even sell the IP, or is it more likely that they will do, as we've heard rumors of, just license it out on an individual case-by-case basis so that, like, they can do a remake of Silent Hill with, over at Bluepoint for PlayStation, or maybe Xbox can license the Metal Gear franchise and give it to Kojima for a game, you know? That sort of thing. Because that's what we've been hearing is the case, so I have to assume that that's more likely. Number two, like, if you bought Konami, you're getting the IP, but you're not getting a development team. So you would buy the IP, and then you would need to be able to go and find somebody else to make the game. And for Xbox, that's maybe a little bit easier just because they own so many teams. Like, you could give Silent Hill to Tango Gameworks, and I'm sure they'd crush it. You could give Metal Gear to Coalition, although I feel like if it wasn't a Japanese studio, it might mess with sort of the feeling of it, but like they could make a good Metal Gear game, or they could just shop it out to Kojima or some other studio in Japan. Regardless, it's certainly a roadblock to have to buy this IP and then go through the tedium of figuring out, okay, but who's going to make it, right? Like, that sucks. There's also, like, if you did do that and you shopped around those IP and you, for example, gave Metal Gear to the Coalition instead of Kojima, people are absolutely going to complain about it, right? Even if Kojima specifically comes out and he's like, I didn't make that game because I didn't want to make that game, right? People will absolutely complain about it. And so it's like, it's this double-edged sword where it'll be huge, but it'll have so much bad press just immediately off the bat if you can't give it to the people that they want to make it. Like, people have these lifted expectations of what these games used to be, and if you can't hit that, then it might end up being worse than just not having the game at all in terms of public opinion. So it's definitely a risk. So while I really want this to happen, and I can very easily see executives at a company like Xbox or like PlayStation saying that it's not worth it, and I can't even say that I would necessarily blame them. So next up is EA, and this is one that I continuously see getting talked about online as like, this is the big one, whoever gets EA wins, talking about it like it's the crown jewel of the games industry or something. And I just do not see it that way, especially for Xbox, because let me get into it, right? So if you bought EA, you would get a ton. Don't get me wrong. They're a huge company. They've got like almost 10,000 employees, which makes them about the same size as Activision Blizzard. There's 40 development teams. Of course, the majority of those are support studios and EA Sports type studios, but still 40 teams is a ton. Some standouts from those 40 are, of course, in my opinion, the crown jewel, BioWare, who makes Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and I would love to see Xbox rescue BioWare out from EA. But you also get things like Codemaster, who makes F1 and Dirt, Criterion, who does Need for Speed and Burnout. You get DICE, who does Battlefield and Battlefront. You get Maxis, who does The Sims, PopCap, who does Plants vs. Zombies and Peggle mobile games, that sort of thing. And Respawn, probably the other big popular studio in this family, which of course makes Titanfall, Apex Legends, and Jedi Fallen Order. You also get a bunch of IP that it doesn't look like is assigned to a particular studio at the moment. Those being like, obviously the sports titles, and then Dead Space, Command & Conquer, Crysis, Medal of Honor, Mirror's Edge, Spore, if you want Spore, and Rock Band. So you get a ton. There's a lot to be wanted from an acquisition of EA. That's not what I'm saying. My problem is that it doesn't really do anything particularly great for Xbox, right? It doesn't do anything for the Japanese market. Nothing that they make is huge in Japan. Nothing that they make is going to help Xbox break into the Asian marketplace. It's just not going to happen. Do they have stuff for kids? Yes, maybe not a ton. They've got the mobile games from PopCap and like the sports titles, but not a huge amount. You've got legacy stuff for sure with, the stuff that DICE makes and the stuff that BioWare makes. But what it really comes down to is, why should Xbox buy Criterion and Codemasters when they already have Playground and Turn 10? Like, doesn't make sense, right? Like, why buy Battlefield when you're already about to own Call of Duty? You don't need PopCap if you've got King, right? Like, none of it really makes sense now that they've bought Activision Blizzard, especially, right? So while I think that BioWare and Respawn would be huge pickups, and I'd love to see Xbox buy just those two studios, not that EA would probably ever part with them, since they're really the only things people like about EA at this point. I just can't imagine a reason to spend that much money and get so much that you already have, right? And on top of that, I also can't imagine PlayStation bothering to buy EA, because all of those games are already multi-platform. That's very unlikely to ever change. Also, I don't think PlayStation can afford them. So Xbox doesn't even need to worry about somebody else acquiring EA, because if anyone were to acquire EA, it would be some outside company. It would be like an Amazon or a Google or an Apple. And unless they also create a new platform, which would probably fail like Stadia, those games aren't going anywhere. So I just don't see any reason for EA to be purchased. It's not worth the money, it's not worth the time, and it's not worth the FTC overlook. It's just not worth it. And speaking of not worth it, next up is Ubisoft. And this is going to be a fun one because recently there's been reports that Ubisoft is looking to sell, or that they're at least entertaining offers, which has, of course, led to people running around saying, oh, Xbox needs to buy them, PlayStation needs to buy them, they need to get Ubisoft, Ubisoft will change everything. Calm down. Ubisoft is not worth it for Xbox, and PlayStation can't afford them, so don't expect either of them to be picking up Ubisoft anytime soon or ever, frankly. Okay, let's just talk about what you would get if you were to buy Ubisoft, right? You get 52 development teams. It's a ton. It's a ton of studios, right? And they're spread all over the world, although only one is in Japan, so it doesn't really help with that too much. I'm not really going to go into detail about the individual Ubisoft studios because they don't really work like that. It's just like, first of all, they're all just called like Ubisoft and then the location that they are. And it's not like, you know, Ubisoft Osaka makes Assassin's Creed and Ubisoft Portugal, I don't know, I made it up, makes the Far Cry games. Like, it's not like that. They kind of all work on everything. So it's not even worth breaking it down. But regardless, you know, you would get some IP that people care about, right? You would get Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Just Dance, all the Tom Clancy stuff like Splinter Cell, Watch Dogs, Rayman, Prince of Persia. But it's just not worth it, right? Okay, first of all, for Xbox, you're getting zero impact in Japan. These games do not move in Japan. Maybe Just Dance, I guess, but like nothing else is touching Japan at all. Kids, you get Rayman, again, I guess. Would they even make another Rayman game? Are people asking for another Rayman game? Like, Xbox already has so many other more popular platformers that they're not using that I don't think Rayman is going to be the one that they all of a sudden start making. In terms of legacy, you of course get Splinter Cell and Assassin's Creed, which are both really big in terms of legacy. But here are some of the problems, right? Ubisoft has 20,000 employees. 20K, that's twice as many as Activision Blizzard. Imagine all of a sudden in a single day trying to take over 20,000 paychecks and 20,000 insurance plans. Like, no, not interested. Not for this. Not worth it. Also, Ubisoft has a huge problem with sexual misconduct, potentially even worse than Activision Blizzard was. And Xbox is already going to be having their hands full trying to fix Activision Blizzard. We cannot expect Xbox to fix the entire games industry. It's just not fair to try and make them do that, and they're not going to put themselves in a position where they need to do that in order to make their studios like publicly acceptable, right? It just doesn't make sense for them, right? And then here's the one that's probably going to get me in the most trouble here, is that Ubisoft games are just kind of mid, right? Like, they're not good. Like, they keep, and they're going downhill, right? You look at the Assassin's Creed franchise and like, it's fine. It's probably the one saving grace of this company at the moment. But, you know, you look at like Far Cry, mid, Watch Dogs, mid, Prince of Persia, mid. Like, there's just so little here for the amount of money that you would have to spend to bring over 20,000 employees. Like, no, pass. Not worth it. Not worth the FTC oversight. Not worth the price tag. Not worth the headache of going through all the sexual misconduct stuff again after Activision Blizzard. Xbox is not going to do that. It just doesn't make sense for Xbox to do this, and it doesn't make sense for PlayStation to do it for all of the same reasons, plus the fact that they can't afford it. Really, in like my head canon, I see a situation where like maybe EA and Ubisoft merge together into like Ubiquitous Arts or something. I don't know. I just made that up on the spot. I don't even know if that's a good name. I think it's okay. Regardless, like, that is the number one thing that I see as a possibility, or them being purchased, Ubisoft being purchased by an outside force like Google, Amazon, whatever. But it's not going to be Xbox. It's just not. There's so many better options. let's go on to a more positive note and talk about Take-Two. This is another one that I see people talking about all the time. You know, everyone wants Take-Two to be acquired by their favorite team, and for good reason. Take-Two is a massive publisher that makes a lot of really quality, really high profit games, right? So if your favorite team were to acquire Take-Two, it'd be a non-stop win for them. Now, in terms of Xbox specifically, it's not perfect. There's definitely some problems, but I think that this is one that they should at least look into. Let's talk about it, right? So first of all, if you were to buy Take-Two, you get two major publishing labels. You get Rockstar, and of course 2K. You get 24 development teams, 9 of which are just Rockstar locations, much like how Ubisoft is. They're just kind of named Rockstar and then the location. I think one's called Rockstar Dundee. I don't know where that is, but I'm told it's a location. So regardless, some of the standout studios among those 24 are, of course, the Rockstar ones who make GTA and Red Dead. You get Firaxis, who I love. They make the Civilization games, and they made XCOM, one of my favorite games of all time. And they're currently working on Midnight Suns, which I thought I was going to be really excited for, but then they said there was a card system, and now I don't think I am. They've got Visual Concepts, who makes the WWE 2K games and the NBA 2K games, which are both massive. You get, these are two that maybe you hadn't heard of, Cloud Chamber and Ghost Story. Cloud Chamber is apparently working on a BioShock game currently, and Ghost Story is being led by Ken Levine, who was the guy who made BioShock in the first place. So they're not big now, but could very quickly become big, is why I chose to mention them. And you also get IP like Duke Nukem, Mafia, and apparently Borderlands. I didn't know that Take-Two owned the Borderlands IP. I would have thought that that was Gearbox, but I looked into it and it looks like there's some kind of like dual ownership situation. I don't know. Maybe that's why the last Borderlands game wasn't called Borderlands. Who knows? In terms of is it worth it? It doesn't really meet my criteria, unfortunately. You know, this has absolutely no reach in Japan. There's not really anything here that is big with the Japanese audience. I mean, there is a Japanese audience for like NBA. Like they love basketball over there. There's an audience for that, but it's not big enough to be like, this is the one they should get for the Japanese market, right? In terms of kid games, again, not really. I mean, there's the sports titles. Apparently the last WWE 2K game was actually pretty good, and I'm sure kids would love that. So there's something there, but not really. And Legacy is, of course, obvious. That's the one that they nail 100%. You've got Red Dead, you've got Grand Theft Auto, which is like, my mom knows what Grand Theft Auto is. You know, you've got BioShock and the sports games even. Like they've got Legacy covered. No worries on that one, right? And their leadership is very solid. I'm sure they've had their problems, and you know, there's probably more that we don't know about. But in terms of just putting out quality games consistently, they nail that, right? Like basically everything they put out is pretty good as far as I'm aware. So no concern as far as that. For me, the FTC might be a problem because they are a bigger company that people recognize as, you know, having some of the most money-making franchises in existence, like NBA 2K, like Grand Theft Auto. So that might be something that kind of triggers the censors. I do think they'd be able to do it because it's a smaller company. They only have about 6,000 employees, which is significantly less than the Activision Blizzard deal. So when that goes through, they'll be able to point at the Activision Blizzard deal and be like, well, you let us do that, and this is a lot smaller. So, you know what I mean? So I feel like that's the thing. It's just, so it doesn't meet my criteria, and I know that that's what I was supposed to be making all my bases for here. But I just can't shake the feeling that, like, if I'm Phil Spencer and the opportunity to buy Take-Two comes across my desk, much like with Activision Blizzard, I'm going to jump on it. Like, it's just something that you can't pass up on. So if the opportunity arises, I could see this being something that Xbox does, but I just don't know if that opportunity is going to arise. Now let's talk about one that I think has among the higher likelihoods of being acquired by Xbox, and that is Sega. And now I know that people have been saying that Xbox is going to acquire Sega for, like, ever, and it hasn't happened yet, which has probably made a lot of people think that it's not going to happen at all, but there's just too many things pointing in that direction for me to ignore. There's too many things for me to pretend that it's not a possibility, right? First of all, Sega has been priming themselves to be acquired lately. They separated their gaming division from the rest of the company, the Sammy Holdings, that does things like life insurance and pachinko machines, and previously did arcades, because they apparently sold all of those off recently, or at least most of them, meaning that the gaming division could be purchased a lot easier now than it could have a couple years back, right? And that gaming division is extremely desirable, especially for Xbox. What do you get, right? Okay, you get Atlas, which is, in my opinion, probably the premier JRPG studio. I know that there's probably some people who will disagree. I think those people are wrong. Atlas makes Persona, all of the Shin Megami Tensei games. They make Catherine, tons of others, right? You've got Creative Assembly, who, again, I think is probably the premier RTS company, because they make the entire Total War franchise, which is amazing, and then they also make Halo Wars, which is less amazing, but still pretty good. You get Relic, who does Company of Heroes, and they helped with Age of Empires 4. You get Ryu Gagatoku Studios, who does Yakuza and Judgment, and they're absolutely fantastic games. You get Sonic Team. If you can't guess what Sonic Team does, then I don't know how to help you. And just a bunch of other teams doing a lot of smaller things and support studio type things. You get IP like Bayonetta, Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, Jet Set Radio, Knights, Panzer Dragoon, Phantasy Star, Shenmue, Streets of Rage, Monkey Ball, Valkyria Chronicles, Virtua Fighter. Just a ton of stuff, right? And all stuff that Xbox could really use in their roster, right? I mean, this would be a huge get for anyone, but just especially for Xbox. And Xbox has a history with Sega, right? They tried to buy Sega when Xbox first got into the industry, and were apparently very close to doing so. They've had tons of exclusives ranging back to the original Xbox with things like Otogi and Jet Set Radio. Creative Assembly has worked on Halo Wars, so they've worked on Xbox's most important franchise. Relic is helped to make Age of Empires 4, so more partnership going on over there. It was Xbox that brought Phantasy Star finally over to the West, after years and years and years. Phantasy Star 2, that is. And also, Sega just completely loves Game Pass. Every single time they put a game in Game Pass, you hear another report about them being like, this was amazing, this really helped us get visibility in the West, this spiked our sales, every single time consistently. So Sega loves Xbox, Xbox loves Sega. Just do it, right? Okay, does it meet my requirements? Obviously, it hits in Japan. It's massive in Japan. Sega is one of the biggest companies in Japan in terms of gaming. Those franchises would be just massively impactful over there. For kids, you've got Sonic, you've got Monkey Ball, right? Sonic is probably one of the most recognizable video game characters for a child audience outside of Nintendo, so that's a huge get for them. You've got Legacy through the roof with Sonic, Total War, Persona, Yakuza, just all of it, really. Their leadership, as far as we know, has no problems. I'm sure that they have some in reality, but as far as we know, it has none. So pretty good leadership over there. So it's just, make no mistake, Xbox wants to buy Sega. And if Sega decides that they want to get bought, I would not be surprised at all if they decide that they want to be bought by Xbox. That relationship is there. That history is there. Sega, in my opinion, will not be bought by anyone if it's not Xbox. Nobody else has the relationship with them that Xbox has. So if you see rumors that Sega is looking to sell, expect Microsoft to be on the other end of that phone. Now let's talk about Capcom, and this is one that I think is very interesting for this conversation, and probably a little too overlooked by the people that I've been seeing talking about this sort of thing. Capcom, to me, is one that if Xbox can get this done, they don't need to buy anything else. Now, the problem is that I don't necessarily know if Capcom is looking to sell, but let's talk about what Xbox would get if they could get Capcom. right? Number one, the RE engine. The RE engine is it's what they use for the Resident Evil remake games. It's a fantastic engine, and clearly the people over there really know how to use it, because those games look absolutely outstanding. If you could take that engine and apply it somewhere else, I think it would be absolutely worthwhile. In terms of the IP you get, it's some of the biggest IP in the industry. I'm talking Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, Mega Man, Devil May Cry, Dead Rising, Marvel vs. Capcom, Ace Attorney, Onimusha, Lost Planet, Dragon's Dogma. This deal is perfect for Xbox's needs. It's huge in Japan. This is one of the biggest things they could do in Japan. Bigger probably even than Sega, maybe smaller than Square, because I know Dragon Quest is like so big that apparently people like request off work to the point where the government had to tell them to release the game on the weekends. I think that might have been an urban legend, but even then, like, the fact that that was even an urban legend was amazing. In terms of kids, yes, you've got Mega Man, you've got Monster Hunter, like, kids are covered, right? Like I said, this is some of the biggest IP in gaming history. So Legacy, we don't even need to talk about Legacy, right? Because Capcom is Legacy, right? Okay, their management, if recent events there's anything to go by, their management must be fantastic, because they have turned this ship completely around. A couple years ago, Capcom was not doing well, but these last, 4 years have been absolutely killer. They have been knocking out amazing games back to back to back. I cannot right now think of a bad Capcom game that's come out in the last 4 years. I'm sure there was one. Feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll be like, you're right, that was a bad one. But regardless, the overall output that they've had has been like top tier, right? This, to me, I think is probably the crown jewel. If Xbox can get this, like I said earlier, they don't need to buy anything else. It will cover all of their bases so hard that they will, honestly, I think if they bought Capcom, they may even beat PlayStation in Japan, which I don't think any of these other purchases would do. A purchase of Sega would, of course, get them a hell of a lot closer, but this one, I think, could push them over the top. And that's something that I think they just absolutely can't pass up on. Now, of course, because Capcom has been doing so well lately, that means that they're probably not really looking to sell. Typically, companies that are doing well are usually looking to grow themselves instead of be sold, right? So it's just, it doesn't seem especially likely. And another thing working against them is that Xbox doesn't have a particularly strong relationship with Capcom. I mean, they used to have Dead Rising, but that's sort of stopped. And there's some Game Pass deals that have happened, but those are pretty few and far between even. Really, the only saving grace as far as relationship is concerned is that I also don't really feel like PlayStation or Embracer have a strong relationship with Capcom. And on top of that, I don't think either of them could afford Capcom. So if Capcom goes up for sale, I think that just by pure weight of money, Xbox could be the ones to take them home, but there's just a lot of ifs. If Xbox can make this work, they need to make this work, but I wouldn't put cards on it happening. And now, finally, the last publisher on this list is Warner Brothers. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you already know how I feel about this. This is one that I think is probably the absolute number one most likely one for Xbox to acquire, even more so than Sega. And it's one that I personally also very much want to see Xbox pick up, because I feel like it just fits their entire MO so perfectly. Let me explain, okay? So studios that you get. Number one, NetherRealm. This is a cannot miss studio for Xbox. It's probably the best fighting game studio in the industry. Xbox does not have fighting games. With this, they would get Mortal Kombat, they would get Injustice, and they would most importantly get Ed Boon, who is like a fighting game savant. You can put that guy on Killer Instinct, you can put him on anything, and he will make a good fighting game out of it, I guarantee it, right? Get that man in your company if you can. Next up, Rocksteady. Okay, they made all of the Arkham games except Origin, and are currently working on Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, which I'll admit, I don't actually necessarily think that one looks super good. Something about it being a shooter just doesn't feel quite right. Whatever. Then there's Avalanche, who's working on Hogwarts Legacy. Monolith, who did all of the Shadow of like Mordor, Shadow of War, those games. Then you've got Traveler's Tales, who did all of the Lego games. And then I forgot to write it down, but there's also Warner Brothers Montreal, who did the other Arkham games and is currently working on Gotham Knights. I pulled that out of my head. Wasn't in my notes. Check that out. Okay, on top of that, you would also get a treasure trove of IP, right? You're getting all of the DC IP. You're getting Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Cartoon Network stuff, HBO stuff, New Line Cinema stuff, Mad Max, Blade Runner, right? Does this meet my requirements? Not all of them. It doesn't really help them in Japan. I concede that, right? There's really nothing here that they make that is big in Japan. Maybe Mortal Kombat. I know Japan has a really big fighting game scene, and Mortal Kombat is one of the bigger fighting games, so maybe that helps out, but not enough to be like, Japan is in the bag if you buy Warner Brothers. So that's like the one negative to this. Otherwise, you've got the Lego games, which are massive for kids. They're like, I love those games. I'm not even a kid, right? But they're definitely kids' games, okay? Then, again, having a fighting game studio in the Xbox lineup is a huge gift for them. It's one of their big holes in their genre lineup. Having a fighting game would be massive. The FTC won't care is another thing, because the Warner Brothers gaming side of Warner Brothers is so small that it's almost not even worth like throwing a fit about like, oh, I can't believe they acquired that too. And if they were to buy all of Warner Brothers Discovery, then all the other stuff that they're getting isn't in the gaming sector. In fact, it's in television and film, which is the sector that Microsoft doesn't have any presence in. So if they were to buy that, the FTC wouldn't be able to be like, oh, you have a monopoly in television and film, because like Warner Brothers doesn't have a monopoly right now, and they're not adding anything to that. So like it just doesn't make sense. And Legacy is, of course, out the door, right? Mortal Kombat is absolutely amazing. You get Batman. All of the IP that I listed before is massive, right? It's huge. It's huge. Get that in your library. And I know that there's going to be people who are going, but Daniel, they won't get the IP. Stop it. Look at yourself. Being wrong. They're going to get the IP. Look at this. Look. Okay. Warner Brothers already tried to sell off their studios once before without the IP. And what happened? No one bought it. Now we're seeing rumors that it's going back up. You think that they haven't figured out what the problem with selling it before was? They're selling the IP. Look at that Imran Khan tweet about the rumors of them looking to sell again. It said they're looking to sell the IP with the studios. And there are, by my estimation, no less than 4 different ways in which Xbox in this purchase could get the IP. Number 1, just buy the video game rights from WBD. This is something that I feel like a lot of people don't know is a thing. Television and movie rights for an IP are different than the video game rights. You can just sell off the right to make, like look at Sony and Marvel with Spider-Man, right? Marvel owns every single thing to do with Spider-Man except the film rights. Sony owns just the film rights. That's why they are the ones who are in control of the Spider-Man movies. But why PlayStation has to license the Spider-Man IP from Marvel in order to make the games. They're not doing that because they own the IP. No, they're paying Marvel for that every time they put out a Spider-Man game, right? So Xbox could just buy the video game rights for those IP. Number 2, they could license the rights on a case-by-case basis. They could just be like, Rocksteady, what are you working on right now? You want to make a game about the Green Lantern? Rad. Totally down for that. We will license the Green Lantern for just this one game. And then 4 years later, when they're done with that game, they'll be like, what do you want to make now? A Flash game? Cool. We're licensing Flash for this game, right? Like, you can do that. You can just buy it piece by piece. That's basically what Marvel is doing with their stuff right now. That's why, like, Eidos was able to do Guardians of the Galaxy and you know, all that kind of stuff, right? Number 3, they could make a mutual IP agreement, right? Xbox could be the sole people who get to make Warner Brothers Discovery IP as video games, and Warner Brothers could be the exclusive people who get to make Xbox IP as television and film. What's the biggest thing in television and film right now? Video game adaptations. There's an Uncharted movie. There's a Last of Us show. There's a Halo show. There's a Twisted Metal show coming for some reason. I don't know who asked for that, but it's coming. It's the biggest thing going in television and film right now, outside of, like, I guess probably still superheroes. But right, so like that's a deal that makes sense for both parties. And number 4, one that I don't think anyone should rule out, is that Xbox could just buy all of WBD. Their evaluation is at, like, I think it was between 45 and 60 billion dollars. They just spent 60 billion dollars, almost 70 billion dollars on Activision Blizzard. Do you think they won't do it again for this? For some of the biggest IP on the planet? You think they won't do that again? Yes, they will. Absolutely, they will. Are you kidding me? And I mean, like, look at what just happened with the Square Enix deal selling off to Embracer, right? They just sold half their studios with all the IP, and it went super fast, so fast that Xbox and PlayStation couldn't even react to it because they were already busy with deals of their own, right? You think WB didn't pay attention to that? You don't think they were like, well, we could sell some stuff too if we got that IP in there. It'd move really fast. We wouldn't have to worry about it not selling like it did last time, right? This is a deal that I think Xbox is going to make. I think it's a deal that Xbox needs to make almost, because it's all of this IP would shoot them through the roof. People look at the stuff that PlayStation is doing and it's like, oh, they've got Spider-Man, oh, they've got God of War. What does Xbox have? And they have a ton of IP now, don't get me wrong. But if they get to just say, and now we can make Lord of the Rings games, now we get to make the Harry Potter games, now we get to make the Batman games, like, they cannot, if that opportunity comes up to them, they cannot and will not pass it up. Not a chance in my mind. And they don't necessarily have to worry about the timing of it, because that's another thing that I've seen people talking about, is that the rumors are that Warner Brothers is looking to sell, you know, those rumors are happening now. And we know that Xbox is busy with the Activision Blizzard deal. Here's the thing. Everyone else is busy too. Xbox is busy with the Activision Blizzard deal that's going to take a while to go through. PlayStation is busy with the Bungie deal, which will also take a while to go through. Even Embracer is busy with the deal to buy Crystal Dynamics in those studios. Everyone is busy and already tied up in legality. They're not going to make another acquisition on top of that because it'll make the first one probably fall through, right? So they don't necessarily have to worry about timing unless, like, Google comes out and buys it or Amazon comes out to buy it, which could happen. You know, I'm not going to rule that out. But this, to me, is the number one publisher that I truly, truly believe that Xbox will acquire. Will I be wrong? Probably, but I can't be wrong if I don't think I'm right. So I'm pretty sure this one's in the bag. So here's my official predictions, right? Will these be wrong? Almost certainly. But I'm going to say them anyway. I think Xbox acquires Warner Brothers and Sega. And then I think Take-Two and Capcom, if they can get those, they will, but it's a little bit of a pipe dream. So pretty much just Warner Brothers and Sega, I'm saying those are on lock. The other two, maybe. I think PlayStation almost certainly is going to buy the remnants of Square. And I think if anyone's going to buy that IP away from Konami, it's going to be PlayStation, and it'd be great for them. Honestly, I'd be thrilled to see a PlayStation-style Metal Gear game. Like, let it happen. If Bandai Namco gets bought, it'll be by Nintendo. I think that's really the only one that I can see them buying. Embracer Group, I don't know. Koei Tecmo, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Even that might be too big for them. I think they're kind of playing a smaller game than that. Regardless, though, that's just what I think about every potential purchase that Xbox could make in terms of publishers. Please let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. This video took so much work and so much time recording it. It's like midnight here now. I'm exhausted. So if you like this content, please subscribe to the channel so that I know it was worth it. Like the video, share it with a friend. You know, it really would mean the world to me. I'm really trying to make this channel take off, and I literally cannot do that without you. So if you liked this video, or even if you were just like, this video deserves to be on a channel with more than 280 subscribers, then please help me out. I would really appreciate it. But that's all I've got for you. I haven't had dinner. I'm exhausted. I'm getting out of here. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time, I'll see you around.